incidents that we are considering clearly come from Islamic-inspired terrorism and from a change of thought and emphasis, indeed, in this part of our United Kingdom. I do just want to make mention that we have not passed the worst days in Northern Ireland. There are still those who wish to use the worst vestiges of terrorism to change the political outlook, to change the determination of our people, to destroy our country. And I just think it's important, Madam Deputy Speaker, to make that reference at the start of this bill. I intend to mention just three areas, two specifically outlined within this bill, and one that I would like the Minister to engage with quite thoughtfully, which I don't think is considered at all within the published bill at second reading. Other members who have had the pleasure or the misfortune of participating in a bill committee may know more than me. I've never sat on a bill committee, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd be delighted to do so and delighted to get involved in some of these issues. Anyone that has sat on a bill committee tells me I'm mad, and that would be the worst thing to put yourself forward for, although there are provisions within this bill that I think it would be incredibly useful to have the opportunity to explore in greater depth. Border security. I think we need to be very careful about how we proceed with the plans within border security outlined within this bill. And although I am a Brexit supporting member of this House, I think it would be irresponsible of us to consider these provisions without having at least some cognizance of the issues that Brexit rise when it comes to border security. When the Right Honourable, or the Honourable Lady, the Shadow Home Secretary, raised her points earlier, the front bench from government were right to indicate that what this section does really emulates what's already provided for in the 2000 Terrorism Act. That is true. Legislative provision that has been here for the last 18 years, and indeed the only difference that I can see is that whilst the 2000 Act focuses clearly on terrorism, this provision within this 2018 bill goes to hostile acts and talks about state party actors. I assume that is the main difference. The most important part, though, of both provisions in the 2000 Act and in this 2018 bill is subsection 4. Subsection 4 in this Part 1 of Schedule 3, and in the 2000 Act it's of Article 41B, subsection 4. And the most important provision, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that it doesn't matter whether there's reasonable suspicion of engagement in terrorism or hostile activity or not. So whilst both parts of the Act in 2000 and the legislation outlined here today in 2018 go to extraordinary lengths to outline what is meant by terrorism, or what is meant by hostile acts, what is meant by terrorist activity, what is meant by state party activity, both parts of both pieces of legislation specifically indicate to border officials who are asked to operate this legislation that it doesn't matter whether you have reasonable grounds for suspicion or not. The truth is, Madam Deputy Speaker, in both the 2000 Act and this bill, you don't need to have any suspicion at all of terrorism or hostile acts. To my mind, that can't be right. When we consider the checks that are going to happen, this legislation, the 2000 Act, specifically talk about travel to and from Northern Ireland, to and from GB, in between this United Kingdom from Northern Ireland to GB, from the top of Great Britain to the bottom of Great Britain, and with no reasonable suspicion whatsoever. Under terrorist legislation from 2000 or this bill today, it is appropriate to be stopped and questioned and potentially searched by one of our border officials. I'm not going to push it much further, Madam Deputy Speaker, at this point, but I do say to the Minister that in the atmosphere created around border controls whether it's on the island of Ireland or between Northern Ireland and GB, we need to consider this more thoughtfully. When Scottish brethren, of which the Minister is one, complained during the 2014 referendum that it is inappropriate for a UK citizen from Scotland travelling to a UK airport in England that they get stopped and questioned, the answer was, well, this House voted for it in 2000 because it was contained within the Terrorism Act. The Common Travel Area does not allow you to be stopped and checked for citizenship, stopped and asked about whether it is appropriate to travel or not. When that happens from Belfast to Birmingham, and it's an affront to UK citizens that you're stopped by a Border Force official travelling from Belfast to Birmingham, those stops, those checks, those questions, offensively, are conducted under anti-terrorist legislation. And this bill that the Minister is putting forward today gives us the opportunity to thoughtfully consider, is that really the intention? Is that really what we want within this country? I'm never going to tie the hands of government who want to protect us from terrorists. But is it appropriate that an average citizen from one part of the United Kingdom travelling to another part of the United Kingdom is stopped under anti-terrorism legislation? I don't think it is, and I do hope that is something, Minister, thoughtfully we can consider as we proceed. In Chapter 2, Article 7, or Section 7, that's outlined within the bill, touching on terrorist connections leading to an aggravating factor in the commissioning of an other offence, I think it's wonderful, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we are being included within this provision. When I say we, I mean us in Northern Ireland. I'm not sure why we were left out in the 2008 counter-terrorism bill. I'm sure there was good reason for it, following political discussions in 2007, but it's not right. And if you are somebody who is perceived to be associated or known to be associated with a terrorist organisation, be that Islamic, be that some other fundamentalist group, be that those originating within Northern Ireland, whether connected to loyalism or republicanism, I think it is appropriate that that serves as an aggregating factor. But again, I raise this question, Madam Deputy Speaker. How does the Minister believe prosecutors will be able to convince the court that an individual has a terrorist connection? I know from my experience within the judiciary in Northern Ireland, I know from the experience of looking both as a barrister and as a politician, it is extraordinarily difficult when asking a court to accept that somebody has a terrorist connection, unless they are similarly, as part of that prosecution or previously, convicted of that offence. And I'll make this gentle point to the Minister, that this undermines community confidence in policing and security in this country. When they know a provision is there in the statute book that says that there should be an aggravating sentence, an aggravating factor, an association with terrorism, when they know, as the dogs in the street know, Madam Deputy Speaker, as it said in Belfast, that somebody is associated with or involved in paramilitarism. Yet there will be no motion in court that that individual should be sentenced with an aggravating offence. Why? Because there either be an unwillingness to prove it or an inability to prove it, Madam Deputy Speaker. The unwillingness will stem from the intelligence that our security services have, which they do not want to share in open court. Colin Duffy walks the streets of Lurgan in Northern Ireland because of an unwillingness from the judiciary in Northern Ireland to allow intelligence to remain private. Dissident Republicans that have terrorised and tortured our society to this day and are still intent on destroying Northern Ireland and taking us out of this United Kingdom walk the streets today because of the inability to present what was otherwise intelligence in open court. And the judiciary have said, well, if you can't do it, then don't bring it to us. If you're not prepared to openly show it, don't bring it to us. And so whilst I think it is wonderful that we are being included in this provision for the first time in 10 years, because we didn't feature in Northern Ireland as part of the 2008 Act, I'd like to know, I would be keen to engage with the Minister, I'd be keen to hear just how this will proceed through open court process. Just how such prosecutions will be made, Madam Deputy Speaker, without going into the details because sub judice, there are cases at the moment where individuals are being prosecuted in Northern Ireland because of how they signed off a text message with a Latin phrase, qui separabit, who shall separate us? It is the motto of a prescribed organisation in Northern Ireland. Is that as far, without divulging intelligence, prosecutors are going to go to try and satisfy membership or association with a prescribed organisation? If it is, then whilst great to be included, I suspect any sentence given in a court in Northern Ireland will never benefit from an aggravating feature. Never benefit from an increase in sentence. So I do look forward to having the opportunity to meet with the Minister and discuss this further. The final part of my contribution, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to bring to your attention was Section 1 of the 2006 Terrorism Act, which dealt with encouraging support for terrorism or glorification of terrorism. When it was put forward in 2005 and it was enacted in 2006, there was some discussion about not only encouraging those to engage in terrorism, but glorification of past offences, and a 20-year limit was put upon such provision. Not in the legislation, spoken about openly, formed part of guidance to police services, that it's okay to glorify terrorist crimes, Madam Deputy Speaker, as long as it was more than 20 years ago. That can't be right. And I do hope that the Minister will take this legislation and potentially accept amendments, whether it's in committee stage or report stage, that will rectify that situation. It is appalling to me that people who are intent on removing life and destroying our society can legally eulogise such vile acts. And I don't need to make that point, Madam Deputy Speaker, from my perspective, from a Northern Ireland perspective. We're 7 years off 20 years from the 7/7 bombings. Can I ask anyone in this chamber whether they think it would be appropriate for any group in this country to memorialise or eulogise the perpetrators of that vile act? We're 7 years away from the potential for that happening if the 20-year guidance is accepted on historic acts from the 2006 Terrorism Act. That is something that I think we should thoughtfully consider. I'll give you an example of D Company, an IRA company in Belfast, who parade through the streets of Belfast each and every year. They are dressed in paramilitary-style clothing. They wear black berets, their black sunglasses, smocks over their faces, military jackets, flags, bands and replica arms. They are encouraging, to my mind, glorifying acts of terrorism. The NIO is responsible for a body called the Parades Commission. Do the Parades Commission even deem those parades sensitive? Never mind ban them for breaching counter-terrorism legislation. No, they don't. They take no interest in it. When we think about whether historic acts have the potential to glorify or not, take this quotation from their 2017 main speaker. British rule was wrong in 1916 and it remains wrong today in 2017. Let nobody tell you any different. Well, D Company of the IRA in West Belfast was one of the most notorious. They're attaching themselves to 1916. They were responsible for historic acts during the course of the Troubles. But they are making the connection very clear under the terms, in my view, of the 2006 legislation. Very clear indeed. The same principles that applied then apply today in 2017. If that's not a glorification, Madam Deputy Speaker, of previous activities or an encouragement to others to recognise that the conditions under which they proudly volunteered, in their view, don't equally apply today and isn't an encouragement under this legislation, then I don't know what is. But when those responsible for the Shankill bombing unveil a memorial 20 years to the day after carrying out that heinous act in 1993, then I think we've got a problem with legislation that tries to account for what is a historic act that can't be seen as glorification or an encouragement. And I raise it, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the hope and in drawing the analogy, because not only have we had horrendous attacks in the last year here in England, we're not going to have to wait too long until we're 20 years after the 7/7 attacks. And if members in this chamber are as horrified as I am at the prospect that such acts should be or could be lawfully, sensibly in our society eulogised, then this bill gives us the opportunity, Madam Deputy Speaker, to do something about it. I do want to thank the Minister, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Security Minister, because he has engaged with us over the last number of weeks. We've had the opportunity for briefings, and I do hope that in this second reading and proceeding to committee stage, we'll get the opportunity to shape this bill so it does provide what we need to counter terrorism in all its forms in this country.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is a pleasure to follow the member for Belfast East, and perhaps particularly so because I think at least an element of my speech would have exhibited a degree of naivety, so I will continue with it.